Hi, my little calaveras. Welcome to or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, hello, my name is Jinx, and if you're returning, welcome back. Alrighty, so today I have a creepypasta for you. So if you're ready to hear this tale, sit back, relax, and let's enjoy this story together. I've really come to hate this time of year. Maybe my grief would be more dormant if I had even a speck of closure or a mediacrum of understanding about what transpired a decade ago. But I simply don't. I loved him. Coping with his absence would be hard enough if the cause was as straightforward as a failed marriage, a terminal illness, or a tragic accident. Even if he had been murdered, horrific as that would have been, murder would have had some associated motive and finality to it. At least I'd be certain he was dead. As I write this, I desperately hope he's dead. Honestly, though, I believe he's still alive somewhere. When the reality of that concept takes hold, it fills me with an intense, unyielding dread. And everyone around me, my coworkers, neighbors, and even my family, doesn't remember what actually happened and their part in it. I would give anything to be like them, swaddled within the hollow embrace of false memories. It started on the first Saturday of August. Night had covered the Chicago suburbs, and we relaxed on the couch with cheap whiskey and cable television. I had set my glass down on the table to look over at Alex and found myself in a blissful stasis. We had known each other since childhood. He proved a kind soul, a hard worker, and a best friend. Had a sturdy head on his shoulders as well. His logical and even-tempered nature proved a great counterbalance to my skittishness. My emotional stargazing ended abruptly due to the emergency broadcast signal that started blaring from our television. When I looked back at our TV screen, I was immediately perplexed. The siren continued to sound, but the screen lacked the usual emergency display with its colored bars. Instead, the noise was playing over what appeared to be the set of a live studio audience type sitcom. The feed appeared hazy, indistinct, and dusty, as if it was recorded in the 70s or 80s. There were two staircases, one on each side of the frame. Climbing a few steps before turning to meet the central balcony accompanying the top of the third room. Below the balcony was a family living space with a stiff-appearing burgundy couch and love seat in the center. A Persian rug, bright blue and gold, lay under the sofa. The color mismatch of burgundy, blue, and gold was intensely off-putting, borderline nauseating. In fact, the entire set was slightly off. Multiple framed family photos hung on the walls, yet the pictures were positioned too low, almost knee level instead of eye level. Every photograph seemed to feature a different family, each striking the same pose, arms around each other, looking forward, set against a cloudy blue backdrop, like something out of a Sears catalog. A lamp without a lampshade sat on the table next to the couch. Its bulb was oversized and bigger than the actual chassis of the lamp. An entire taxidermied deer occupied a space in the back of the room behind the couch, head facing towards the wall instead of forward and into the room. Before I could question Alex about what he thought was happening, a solitary figure appeared on the screen from stage left. A black pant leg with matching black tuxedo shoe entered the frame. Right before hitting the floor, it halted its motion and remained suspended in midair for at least 30 seconds, as if the whole thing had transitioned to being a still photograph instead of a live feed. Suddenly, the heel of the shoe finally contacted the ground, causing the emergency siren to instantly stop. Nothing replaced the deafening noise, not even the familiar sound of dress shoes tapping against a hard surface. The figure rapidly paced into the area in front of the couch and turned to face the camera. Besides the shoes making no sound against the wood tile, his feet seemed to phase slightly in and out of the floor as he walked. He wore a deep navy pea coat buttoned up to the top button, with half of the white bow tie peeking out from the collar. In his hand, he held the same type of microphone used by Bob Barker during his tenure on The Price is Right. I think it's called a gooseneck. It was long and slender, with a tiny microphone head on top to speak into. A power cord connected to the microphone dragged behind him, eventually tapering off to reveal that the damn thing wasn't even plugged in. I don't recall many details about his face, excluding his eyes and their respective sockets. They were downright cavernous, triple the diameter and depth of an average person, extending well into his forehead, almost meeting his hairline, down into his cheekbones, with the perimeters connecting at the bridge of his nose. His actual eyes looked almost normal, proportioned correctly, and moving as you'd expect. That being said, they appeared to be made of glass, the strange lights intermittently refracting off one or both, depending on his positioning. After some excruciating silence, he introduced himself as Mr. Eugene Tantamount and began to spin off his brief monologue. I will attempt to transcribe the speech as I remember it below, but I can't say that it's 100% accurate for two reasons. One, those few minutes of my life happened upwards of 10 years ago. On top of that, the speech was incoherent and nearly unintelligible. At least to me. Mr. Tantamount spoke with clunky phrasing and took random pauses, all while interspersing a variety of nonsense words into the mix. Here's the best summary I can come up with from what I can remember. In terms of nonsense words, I am mostly guessing in the spelling. I would hear a lot of them in the days following the broadcast, but I never saw them written down. Hello, guests. My, what a day we're having. It reminds me of before. Pauses for about 15 seconds or so. As another note, I do not recall him speaking into the microphone. He just kind of held it off to the side. What of the next steps? Who will have the win to become the Clavingstang? Ah, yes, the Grand Great. As everyone wants to become Clavenstang, not all can. And I am part of all. As you can plainly see, I am very tripid. Pauses, points his right index finger at one cavernous eye socket, after which he points at the other, looking around as he does so. However, one of the population is not tripid, or they have the courage to expel tripidness. To become Clevingstang, the hero must be a fulfilled. They must show utmost grifstiff. A hero rejects tripid and becomes grifted, which you can all plainly look. I am not. Pauses again. Identically points his right index finger at eye sockets like he did before. Alas, only time will speak, but soon. As now time Clavensting grows withered, show your grifstiff and become above, to honor dying hero. Say today is now over, to pass, and begin all future. Bows, screen goes black. Initially, I was shell-shocked. I looked over at Alex, hoping to unpack what the actual fuck just happened, when the image flashed on the screen, accompanied by what sounded like an amphitheater full of people clapping, somehow louder than the emergency siren. An elderly man in his 60s or 70s was pictured sitting on a throne made of slick black material. Nothing else was easily visible in the frame. The background was obscured by the angle of the camera and the darkness that lurked behind him. The fuzzy quality that made the last segment feel like a sitcom had dissipated. The feed became crisp, clear, and wreathed in thick shadows. He wore green and brown army camo, with the sleeves of his pants rolled up to their halfway point to reveal his forearms and calves. Initially, it looked like his arms and legs were gently resting against the material. However, upon further inspection, it became clear that all the skin that made contact with the throne was fused to it. Imagine how the cheese on a burger patty looks while cooking. Specifically, when the edges of it extend beyond the meat and onto the grill itself, how the cheese ends up bubbling and cauterized against the hot metal. That's fairly close. Above his collar, his eyes remained open, held in place by the same black material, which fish hooked under his upper lids and tethered them to something out of frame, preventing him from blinking. The material appeared to fill the space around his eyeballs, dripping down the corners of his eyes. He looked only forward into the camera. I'm unsure if he could even move his eyes elsewhere. His mouth remained closed. Despite that, the material trickled down the edges of his lips, just as it did from the sides of his eyes. I thought he was dead, until I saw the synchronicity of his chest rising with the subsequent flaring of his nostrils. It was slow, but he looked like he was breathing. Before I could discern more, the feed unceremoniously returned to normal. I turned to Alex and reflexively asked, Jesus, what was that? Alex held his hands over his mouth, sitting forward, letting his elbows rest on his knees. I assumed that the broadcast had startled him and put my hand on his shoulder, trying to console him. Then he said something like this. "Can you imagine?" "Can I imagine what, love?" I replied. "Can you imagine getting the chance to be Clavenstang?" he said, his eyes welling up with tears. A little taken aback, I figured he cracked a joke to deal with whatever avant-garde bullshit we'd unwillingly endured. I forced a chuckle, trying to play along with the bit, but he turned to me and glared at me. Jarred by the suddenness of his anger, I found myself too bewildered to calibrate a different response, and he silently excused himself to the bedroom. I followed him in a few minutes after that, taking a moment to compose myself. But he did not want to talk about it anymore when I met him in the bed. As far as I can recall, the following few days remained relatively normal. Slowly, however, Alex began to exhibit strange behavior. First, I found him rummaging through my sewing supplies, observing the geometry of my sewing needles from every angle, holding them by the head while swiveling his head around them. When I asked him what he was doing, he said something along the lines of, "Could I borrow some of these?" I asked why the hell he would need to borrow some of my sewing needles. He again became frustrated with me, dropping everything, and left the room. Later on that week, I woke up to find him out of bed at 3 a.m. or so. Concerned, I got up and looked around. He wasn't in our bathroom, the kitchen, or the living room. Eventually, I started calling out for him. I was about to call 911 when I located him in our guest bathroom with the lights off. Nearly gave me a coronary. When I flicked the light on, he was stretching both of his eyelids and staring into the mirror. I gave him shit for not responding to me while I was calling his name. When my anger softened to concern, I pleaded, no, I begged, to explain his behavior. I think he responded, "Just checking how trivet I am." The following morning, he did not go to work. When I asked him if he felt unwell and took a sick day, he informed me he quit his job. Sequentially, lifting each of his fingernails of one hand with the other and inspecting the space under them by putting them right up to his face. I stood there in stunned silence, and eventually he said to me, or maybe just to himself, "I'm really pretty grist-stiff, I think." I sat down next to him and put my right hand over his, noticing a firm, thin, and movable lump between the tendons of his second and third fingers. When I saw the pin-sized entry wound closer to his wrist, I realized he had inserted one of my sewing needles under the skin of his hand. He saw my abject horror, and his response was, "Slightly less trivet now. More work to be done, though." I phoned my mother, explaining the whole situation in a likely confusing jumble of words and gasps. When I was done, my mom paused for a few moments and then replied, "Well, honey, I wouldn't be too worried." My heart raced. I think he is going to be able to get more grist-stiff. What an honor that would be for both you and Alex. Let him know he can come over and borrow more sewing needles if he thinks he needs to. Speech failed me. At some point, my mother hung up. I guess she supposed we got disconnected. In reality, I was just catatonic. Everyone we talked to in the days following the broadcast spoke the exact same as Alex and my mother. They all knew the new lingo, and moreover, they all acted like I knew what the fuck they were talking about. We started getting cold calls to our home phone from numbers I did not recognize. They would ask if they could speak to Alex. Or they'd ask how it was going, how trivid he still was, and how gristiff I thought he could be. Eventually, these calls arrived with area codes from outside of Illinois. Then, it was international calls. If Alex got to the phone before me, he would just sit there and listen to whoever was on the other end of the line, with a big grin on his face. At a certain point, I disconnected our home line. That just meant all these calls started to come to our cell phones. If I asked, he was unable or unwilling to explain what was transpiring. In fact, he looked dumbfounded when I asked. Like the questions were so frustratingly basic that he could not even dignify them with a response. All the while, the memories of Mr. Eugene Tantamount, the man in camo, and the black plastic substance haunted me. No research I did on any of it was ever fruitful. At work, people would pat me on the back or go out of their way to do something nice for me. Initially, I assumed they had somehow heard that Alex's grasp on reality was dwindling and they were trying to offer me support. This notion was shattered when my boss presented me with a Hallmark card signed by every member of my office, all 40 of them. Inside, it said, "Thank you for supporting Alex and congratulations on being the spouse of the next grand great. Alex will make a wondrous Clavenstang." Sometimes, I wish I had just given up, gone far away with no plan of returning. All with the recognition that this event was beyond my understanding or control. If I had done that, I would have had a different last memory of Alex. But I loved him, and I couldn't abandon him. Still, staying was a mistake. When I returned home from work 3 weeks after this all had started, I discovered Alex sitting at our grand piano in the living room. Music was his creative outlet for as long as I had known him, and I felt a brief pitter-patter of hope rise in my chest, seeing him sitting on the piano bench, back turned towards me. That hope vanished with the noise of a wire being cut with scissors. I crept towards him, trying to brace myself for whatever was happening. I got to Alex's shoulder, and he turned towards me. He was delicately feeding piano wire through the space between his left eyelid and eyeball towards the back of his eye socket. I felt my knees give out, and I fell backwards. The noise drew his attention. He pivoted his body and smiled proudly in my direction, small spurts of blood running down his face onto his t-shirt. His right eyeball bulged from its socket, with a few centimeters of piano wire sprouting out from the cavity at the 6 o'clock position. I think I'm finally gristiff. I rushed to call the paramedics, locking myself in our bedroom for the time being. They assured me they understood and would be there ASAP. Sobbing, I prayed that the ambulance would be there soon, before Alex had lost his vision. Or worse. It couldn't have been more than a minute before I heard multiple knocks at the door. I swung open the bathroom door and sprinted through the house. The knocks continued and intensified as I ran past Alex to what I thought were the medics. As I twisted the doorknob, dozens of people spilled into our home. Some of them I recognized. Next-door neighbors, a UPS man I was friendly with, but most of them were strangers. They were all smiling and clapping and laughing as they surrounded Alex. They lifted him onto their shoulders and moved him out the door. I yelled at them to put him down. At least I think I did. Honestly, it was all so much in so little time, I may have just let out some feral screams rather than saying anything coherent. When I followed them outside, I saw nothing but people, hordes of them, stretching in every direction. I legitimately could not determine where the crowd ended. To this day, I have no idea how many people were in that mob, but I want to say it bordered on the thousands. Nearly every inch of the asphalt, grass, and sidewalk in our cul-de-sac had someone on it. None of them were outside when I got home from work, which couldn't have been more than 10 minutes prior. Each of them had the exact same disposition and jubilation as Alex's kidnappers, their ecstasy only growing more feverish when they saw Alex arrive on the shoulders of the people who had stolen him from our home. I tried to keep up with him and his captors, but I couldn't fight through the human density. I watched Alex slowly disappear over the horizon amongst the veritable sea of elated strangers. Hours later, the last of the crowd vanished over the horizon with him. I'd been at St. Alex since August 25th, 2015. Upon contacting the police, I anticipated the detective would act as the others had in the preceding months. But he was unfamiliar with the word trivid, as well as the word gristiff. He did not know what it was to be Clavenstang. Instead, in a real twist of the psychological knife, he turned it all back on to me. How about instead of wasting my time, you tell me what a Clavenstang is, or what it means to be gristiff? And of course, I did not know. I still do not know. My mom didn't recognize the words anymore. My coworkers did not recognize the words anymore. And it's not like Alex was erased from reality or anything. I still have all of our pictures and all of his belongings. But when I try to speak to anyone about him and what happened, they cut me off and say something like, "So sad about the boating accident. I bet he's happier wherever he is now, though." What truly tests my sanity is the fact that the explanation for his disappearance changes every time I talk to someone about it. It's like they know he's gone, but when they are pressed on the details behind the fact, their minds are just set to say whatever random thing pops into their head. Too bad about the esophageal cancer. Gosh, that house fire was so tragic. Can't believe he got hit by that drunk driver. What a crying shame. The only detail that doesn't change is that everyone is very confident that he is – happier wherever he is now, though. I'm not so confident about his happiness or his well-being. In fact, I'm downright terrified that wherever he is starting to look like the man in the army camo, subsumed by whatever that slick, black, plastic-like material is. I would give anything to be like everyone else and just forget. I would give anything to experience even a small fraction of that serenity. But I can't forget. And this Tuesday will mark a decade since his disappearance. And for the longest time, I convinced myself I wouldn't turn on my TV. But who am I kidding? I'll be there, watching, just like the rest of you. Hi, my little Calaveras. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, share, all the good things. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, sorry it was a little bit later. My allergies were making my voice really, go out. It happens, but hopefully I can get that under control. But I still got a video out for you guys. I'm just gonna keep it short and sweet today. I hope you enjoyed this, and don't forget that in the description I always have my socials linked, as well as my Reddit and Gmail if you want to submit a story. I'm gonna start rambling, so I better get going. But before I go, remember, my little Calaveras, don't let anyone or anything steal your light. Check under your bed at night. And until next time, bye.